I'm on a roll with myself here. Ignore me if you want to. I want to keep talking about this programming thing. Definitely, if you're watching this, watch the video I did just before this to catch up to where I'm going with this. So, when you know of true self, and this is just my personal opinion from my limited experience in exploring a number of different, predominantly Eastern philosophies, which I have applied to my own life in ways that are successful. And but the other side, that programmed side of me, that stimulus response side of me, the reactive side of my nature, I can see when it's coming into play. And many times it does take it does take over, and personality starts to dictate behavior versus being centered in self and perceiving or experiencing life as it comes without the effect of personality. What I mean by that is, with personality, you can program into personality a projection, a further projection deeper into the consciousness of an idea. So let's say, for instance, the temple priests come up with this idea that there is going to be a great plague, and this has nothing to do with today. I'm talking, in other terms. They come up with this idea of a great plague, and they start telling people, this great plague is coming, and then those people, because they are only thinking in terms of personality. Again, this is not referencing what's going on today. All right, so just stop it. The idea that there's a possibility of that, and because the people in power, the temple priests, those who speak for God, are saying it, the majority of the population will take that information, and it will be projected into the consciousness and into the personality, and the personality will think with that information, whether true or false. It doesn't matter if there's truth to it or not. So, for instance, the priesthood could, if they wanted to, because they already understand about medicines and diseases and things of that nature. If they wanted to, they could cook up a type of disease that could be implemented in somewhat of a controlled fashion, because if they created it, they would also know how to uncreate it. So it's similar to casting spells. Those who cast the spells also know how to uncast the spells, but they never tell anybody how to uncast the spells, and that's what keeps people spellbound. So, if that's the case, then the high priest can use the fear in that to cause the herd to behave in a mass way, behave as a single unit, instead of as individuals. So, for instance, in that case, if for instance, let's say that that yes, there were some cases of this in some certain pockets and areas, but they were saying it's going to be bad, and I'm talking about, like, this is just theoretical, and they're saying it's going to be bad, but realistically, not much has really happened. The fear of that can give even more powers to the priest class, which could add or subtract certain control mechanisms. They could reintroduce further control mechanisms, or they could retract certain ones depending on how they wanted to update the program. And so the herd mentality is what's being programmed. I could have used a different example. That's just the one that came to mind, because plagues are talked about so much in biblical times. it's kind of like how, putting a bunch of blankets covered in smallpox and giving them to the Indians, and then sending them sending the Indians out west in the wintertime, when the smallpox will have a longer rate of survival and contagion and passing and all of that. That was a bioweapon attack. So if they understood bioweaponry back then, if you don't think that they understood it in previous times, I don't know where you think they got that idea from. But so as an example, you can use it as a two-pronged kind of assault. You can use something like that also in a depopulation type of scenario, which in a controlled depopulation to a certain point, or you can use that to implement other certain measures, or to update the program in such a way that you create a new fear-based way of thinking, where now you've created an invisible fear, kind of like how they would create these demon entities, these creatures from hell, these scary things that would come and get you in the night, or whatever. If you did something wrong, if you did something in error, or the laws that were applicable as well. But you'd also have the metaphysical fear factor side of behaving in a certain way. But when you can introduce, a nebulous kind of fear factor into this programmable metaphysical matrix, well, once you have people in a state of fear, they're in a survival mode, so they're more reactive. Once somebody is more reactive, it's a lot easier to cause them to move a certain way. A lot of this came out of understanding how to herd animals. And how herd mentality works in ancient times, and applying the same techniques to human populations that you would populations of sheep or cattle. Same with the branding and all of that stuff. You could obviously make that correlation. But so the controlling of the program is essential. And when you have a fear-based mindset, when they've locked in a state of complex fear, where everything that you're doing is now questioned, because of this introduction of it. But when you go outside, here's the difference between being self and personality. If you're just self, and they're telling you, oh, this great plague is coming, but you come outside and you look around and nothing has changed. All of your neighbors are still going about their business. Everybody's doing their thing. Nothing's actually changed. So when I'm looking around my neighborhood, I'm going, okay, I understand what I'm being told, but I'm seeing something different. So, so you have to constantly update that program. You have to constantly deliver that information out there in whatever form you can, and through whatever resources you can, through entertainment and information, in order to keep the program going. Because if you break the program, if somebody wakes up and comes back to self, then the program stops working on them. So when in reference again to this ideological sense of self versus true self, this becomes an ego-based thing. So then we get into the what I was talking about before, when you are cut off from source, when you are cut off from your spiritual self, which in many religions, this would be your feminine nature, and your masculine nature would be the psychological, and then there's the manifest of either or in the physical universe, when you come in as a male or a female body, but you have a masculine or feminine nature. So you can have men who behave more feminine and women who behave more masculine, because that's where their nature lies, somewhere in between. And the point of Buddhism and Zoroastrianism and many of the Eastern religions, yoga and all of that, is to merge these two into a balanced whole, so that true self is born out of that coupling. When you're talking about keeping people programmed into thinking of themselves as a physical body, you go into Darwinian theory and all of that, this theory of evolution, which when you look at it an actual scientific standpoint, not just the theoretical standpoint, in terms of how does DNA alter from one species to another, and how long would that take, and then also the skeletal remains, and in which strata were they found, and all these things. There's so many outpoints in it that it's impossible to prove without it being still theory, that's the factual case of the theory in regard to the theory of evolution. But if you can convince people that the theory of evolution is fact, beyond fact, and that I'm crazy for challenging it, then you can convince them that they are not a spiritual being and don't have a spiritual body, that they are just a mind and a body and a pile of emotions and things and bills and responsibilities and timetables and friendships to deal with and gossip and all of these other things. That becomes the self as it's programmed in from birth, through control over the educational system, through control over the entertainment models, through control over information, through control over religion, all of these things. So at some level, as people filter up out of a lower state of consciousness, you still have other traps that are set for them that will keep them from coming to, generally speaking, to a full realization of true self, which will break the spell that we've all been under for thousands of years. Not many of us. You know, there are a few. I'm still under it. I'm just trying to think clearly through it, because I understand that I'm being intentionally programmed on a daily basis what to think, what to feel, why to think it, why to feel it, what trend I think should be cool, what music should I listen to, what shoes should I wear, what hat should I wear, what language should I use, you know, what kind of slang should I use. All of these things become programmed into a personality. So you have somebody who grew up in the suburbs with a very religious family, and they come out of that, you know, as a hip-hopper, talking hip-hop and using that whole street language and lingo, but yet they grew up in the suburbs, but they've created a personality for themselves that is defined from the identifying themselves in the cultural identity of a hip-hop kid, a street kid, a kid from the hood, and mocking up all of those identifiers in themselves, and then revealing themselves as that character. So they don the wardrobe, they pick up the lingo, and they go out into the world. That's how you can see in high school and all that. 1 year, little Johnny is a textbook nerd. You see him after summer, he comes back and he's a punk rocker with his head shaved, wearing monkey boots, and you're like, what the heck happened to little Johnny? Well, little Johnny's cousin came to town from New York, and he happened to be into the punk rock scene, introduced little Johnny to punk rock and showed him how cool it was. Well, now little Johnny's a punk rocker, and now he's a rebel. He's no longer a nerd, you know, that kind of thing. And it's all a trick, you know. So he's now taken on the programming of a punk rocker and projected that programming into his own idea of self, the self-identifier, which would be ego. So ego becomes the central focus. That's the personality, this unreal, non-existent idea of self that's projected out into the metaphysical universe and held in place on a daily basis by focusing and concentrating on who we think we are, and constantly filling our minds with information that we see as pertinent to backing up that program. So we're not going to go to information that we find that deprograms us, because it's terrifying. It's like, oh wait, oh my God, what is this? Wait, this doesn't make sense to me. This can't be real, and we go away from it, because the deprogramming can happen very quickly, and it can be very dramatic, and people can go crazy when they realize that they've been living a lie their entire lives, and that the majority of everything that they've been told is complete and absolute bullshit. That can be quite a coming to. I'm not telling you that's the way it is. This is just what I'm suggesting, and can tell you from actual experience, not only self-experience, but seeing other people have a similar waking up, coming to, Doesn't mean that you're not fluctuating between these two worlds. It's a constant fluctuation. That's the Zoroastrian idea of it. It's about being able to see through that fluctuation and base yourself on your spiritual nature rather than the idea of self, the metaphysical nature, that becomes manifest in behaviors and attitudes and ways that you communicate and deal with other people. So that's the programming. So once the programming comes in and we're walking around every single day with this idea of self projected into our minds, which solidifies as an ego, then the people that don't want to identify with that, who are just struggling in this gray area between, yeah, I'm more happy being a spiritual person and all of that, but there's still that struggle between these two worlds and the force of the programming that we're constantly under every single day. So, but then there are those who have embraced the program and become the ego, and they rely on the program for their survival. Without the program, then they become obsolete. In fact, come on out. And in fact, every time I get to an important part, in fact, the programming becomes so severe that the identification with the ego self, with the personality, becomes so solidified that any attempt to tear somebody away from it is actually met with physical violence. So, but those generally would be the people who have embraced this idea of ego and prefer ego over true self, over the spiritual self, which is no one, which is nobody, nowhere, no time, no thing. It's just a vibe. You become a vibe, not a personality. And that vibe still experiences life. It still has ups and downs. So the vibrational tone, the frequency of the vibe is going to, just like, a musical instrument, is going to play based on what our contact with the physical universe dictates. And how spiritual we are, we'll be able to maintain a certain higher vibrational frequency in the face of forces that want to drive that frequency back down so low that it becomes disconnected from source again and starts to project itself as personality instead of true self. So once you're projecting yourself as personality into the metaphysical universe, into the psyche, psyche actually means spirit. So I hate using these terms, but people understand them a little bit better. They've identified psyche with a mind, a mind. The mind, but that's not what psyche is. Psyche is spirit. So I don't really like using the term in that way, but they flipped it on top of its head, so that the study of spirit, which is what they were doing back in ancient Greece, becomes the study of the mind, which they want us to do in present time. Psychology is knowledge of the spirit, not knowledge of the mind. So when they reverse this, they cause us to project inward. So when you're dealing with a psychologist and they're not dealing with spiritual solutions to emotional or mental or relationship issues, if they're not dealing with spiritual solutions, then they're giving you mental solutions to try and deal with those and dragging everything out. It's just a trick. It's a parlor game trick. Because the real solution is the simplest. Get out of mind, disconnect from mind, reconnect with true self and source, and then reconnect with the mind as an instrument that you can use to interact with the physical universe and do the jobs you need to do and do the things you need to do and operate the machinery you need to operate and think creatively and paint pictures and do all of the things that rise up the ladder of our creative nature. Then the mind becomes, a musical instrument rather than an anchor of bondage. We get out of that idea. But the artful trickery of causing us to not only project our idea of self into the metaphysical universe and hold it there, but then to cause that idea of self projected in the metaphysical universe to then project itself into the machinery universe, the physical universe, as an identity, a personality that's held up inside of the programs of Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all of that, where we create a new false personality even outside of our original false personality. Now we're holding both of those into place. But now the personality that we've projected into the machine can reprogram our personality, because we're defending a false personality, and that false personality may think under false premises and may not be a truthful example of self, but you have to defend it. And so what ends up happening is you start reprogramming your personality that you have in your own mental matrix to better fit or match the personality that you've created in the physical matrix of the internet.